Can you even read? The question landed in the heavy, perfume-scented air of the dining room with the jarring impact of a glass shattering on marble. It wasn't a question of capability, but a calculated strike of social dominance, designed to remind everyone within earshot that the woman in the starched uniform was nothing more than an ornament of service. In an instant, the low hum of elite conversation evaporated, and the restaurant became a silent, high-stakes stage where every guest held their breath. Standing at the center of this social ambush was Chloe Bennett, a 25-year-old waitress whose rigid, professional posture masked a mind far more dangerous than anyone in the room suspected. Before her stood the Mafia boss's wife, a figure of sharp, satin-clad elegance with one hand on her hip, her face twisted into a smirk of practiced cruelty. Seated nearby, Sungwoo Choi watched with a statue-like intensity, his brows slightly furrowed as he gauged the breaking point of the woman standing between them. What the woman in the black satin dress didn't realize was that Chloe was no mere servant. She was a linguistics prodigy with a frighteningly powerful eidetic memory. To Chloe, the world was not made of people and objects, but of architectural blueprints of information. While she maintained her calm facade to fund her grandmother's medical care, her mind was busy processing the petition for dissolution of marriage she had scanned inside Sungwoo's briefcase just minutes earlier. A document that contained the very weapon she was about to use to silence the room forever. The early evening air inside the restaurant was thick with the scent of white truffles and the hushed, predatory murmur of the city's elite. Chloe Bennett moved through the dining room like a ghost, her starched black uniform a shadow against the gilded wallpaper and crystal chandeliers that defined the luxury of the establishment. To the patrons, she was a functional object, a silent witness to their filtered lives who existed only to refill wine glasses and present menus embossed with swirling gold script. They didn't see the woman who, by day, navigated the hallowed halls of a top-tier university as a linguistics prodigy on a full scholarship. Her mind, a flawless archive of dead and dying languages, was currently translating the room into architecture. She didn't just hear the clinking of silverware on porcelain, she heard the rhythmic cadence of status. As she navigated the floor, Chloe performed a mental exercise to stay sharp, mentally deconstructing the Ugaritic cuneiform roots of a word whispered at table 4 while simultaneously calculating the precise angle needed to clear a guest's dessert plate without breaking their conversation. This job was a place to hide, a rigid choreography that allowed her to be invisible while she earned the staggering amount of money required to keep her grandmother's heart beating in a facility that cost more than her annual tuition. Chloe was an observer by nature, a collector of details that others deemed insignificant. She noticed the faint tremor in a broker's hand and the way a politician angled his body away from his wife. This hyper-awareness was the product of a frighteningly powerful eidetic memory that saw text as blueprints and sentences as load-bearing walls. She could still recall the exact kerning on a manuscript she had seen in a dusty library 5 years ago, a gift that made the mundane world feel like a sprawling, decoded map. The pressure of the shift was mounting as the kitchen fell behind, but Chloe remained the quiet center of the chaos. She approached a corner booth where Sungwoo Choi sat with a heavy leather briefcase. For a fraction of a second, the case clicked open as he retrieved his phone, and Chloe's eyes reflexively scanned the top page of the document inside. She didn't just see words, she saw the formal header and the stark, unforgiving title, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. She cataloged it instantly, tucking the image into a mental vault before adjusting her professional mask to ask if they were ready to order. She had no way of knowing that the woman beside him was about to shatter the silence by questioning her very humanity. If you want to see exactly how a single pen stroke can cost a Mafia wife 80% of her fortune, hit that like button and subscribe for Chapter 2. Comment checkmate below if you're ready to see Chloe dismantle the elite, and don't miss the moment Sung-woo Choi realizes he's just met his match. Are you a literate girl? The question landed in the opulent silence of Lucille Latoile like a shard of glass, a weapon designed by generations of privilege to strip a person of their dignity. As every whisper in the dining room ceased and silverware froze against porcelain, the entire restaurant, a gilded cage of old money, held its breath. At the center of this public execution of status stood Chloe, maintaining a perfect line of unmoving dignity in her starched black uniform. Before her sat the wife, a vision of cruel elegance in black silk, and Sung-woo Choi, a man of menacing stillness whose gaze was fixed on nothing. The wife's lips, painted a vicious shade of crimson, twisted into a smirk as she tapped a manicured nail on the menu, demanding to know what the potage parmentier was before sneering. So I ask again, are you stupid or simply illiterate? The accusation was meant to reduce Chloe to a functional object that had malfunctioned, but the woman in the satin dress did not know she was addressing a linguistics prodigy with a frighteningly powerful eidetic memory. To Chloe, text was architecture, and her mind was a flawless archive of every detail she encountered. In that stretched-out moment of humiliation, the quiet waitress vanished, replaced by the cold, precise scholar. She replayed the image of the document she had scanned when Sung-woo's heavy leather briefcase had clicked open for less than a second, the formal header, the dense legalese, and the stark title, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Chloe did not cry or flinch. Her motion was fluid and deliberate as she reached across the table, not for a glass, but for the heavy fountain pen lying beside Sung-woo's placemat. Her fingers closed around the black pen with its silver nib, an instrument of power and signature. No one breathed as she took the menu, the source of the insult, and turned it over to the pristine canvas of its back. The click of the pen being uncapped was the only sound in the vast, silent room. With her penmanship serving as a masterclass in calligraphy, Chloe did not write her name. Instead, she drew a perfect miniature replica of the legal document's header and wrote the single venomous clause that mattered: any public disturbance, display of temper, or action resulting in social disgrace shall trigger an immediate and non-negotiable reduction of the spousal settlement by an amount equal to 80%. As she placed the pen back, perfectly parallel to the menu's edge, the silence shifted into the deafening roar of a vacuum. The color drained from the wife's cheeks, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed horror as she recognized the bars of her gilded cage. Chloe met her gaze, her voice even and quiet. Would you like me to translate the menu for you now, madam? Or perhaps you've lost your appetite. The next afternoon, Chloe was polishing silverware in the back of the restaurant when Antoine, the manager, approached her. His usual frantic energy was gone, replaced by a kind of nervous reverence as he whispered that a gentleman was waiting to see her in his office. Chloe felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach, expecting a threat or a warning to disappear after the previous night's confrontation. Instead of Sung-woo Choi, she found a younger man in a perfectly tailored suit who introduced himself as Daniel Park, legal counsel for Mr. Choi. He stood as she entered, his sharp eyes missing nothing as he assured her he was not there to cause trouble. Chloe remained standing, her guard up as she asked what he wanted. Mr. Park allowed a small, thin smile, explaining that his employer had been impressed by her precision, her memory, and her restraint in using the information she held as a shield rather than a sword. He described the global and complex nature of Mr. Choi's business interests, which often involved contracts, historical deeds, and communications written in multiple languages or coded phrases. They didn't just need a translator, they needed an analyst who could see the architecture of information and spot a lie written in a dead language. He slid a plain white envelope across the cluttered desk, calling it a retainer. It was an amount more than the restaurant would pay her in a decade, a sum that would handle her university fees and ensure her grandmother received the best care available anywhere. Chloe understood that the stakes of her life had just been rewritten. Though it was a dangerous leap into an unknown world, it was the only path to the future she truly cared about. With a steady breath, Chloe accepted the offer, stepping out of the world of starched aprons and into a reality where her mind was the most valuable asset in the room. The transition from the world of starched aprons to the clinical stillness of Sungwoo Choi's inner sanctum was jarring. Chloe was taken not to a gleaming skyscraper, but to a discreet, unmarked building in the city's financial district, where her new office felt less like a workspace and more like a high-tech vault. Behind soundproofed walls, she was surrounded by a single large desk, a powerful computer terminal, and a library of digital archives that would make any university jealous. Her first assignment was a test of her value. Daniel Park placed a tablet on her desk, displaying a high-resolution image of a document fragment written in a 16th-century Basque dialect, layered with dense Latin legal phrases. The document was a land grant pertaining to a significant mineral deposit, and according to Mr. Park, 3 different experts had provided 3 different interpretations of the ownership clause. One was believed to be a deliberate lie, and Chloe was tasked with finding it. As she stared at the screen, a familiar, icy calm settled over her. The noise and pressure of the outside world vanished, replaced by the patterns and history embedded in the shape of each letter. She worked for 7 hours without a break, her mind deconstructing the architecture of the text. She didn't just translate the words, she analyzed the scribal hand, identifying a minute inconsistency in the pressure of the quill on a single word. She cross-referenced the phrasing with Roman property laws and delved into deep digital archives of folk histories from the period. The answer, she discovered, was not in what was written, but in what was omitted. A specific Latin conjunction had been used to create a deliberate ambiguity, but Chloe found a cultural key in a contemporary religious text that used the exact same structure to illustrate indivisible ownership. The land grant didn't give ownership to a single entity. It bound the family and the church together, creating a loophole that acted as a cage. Chloe wrote up a concise, brutally efficient 3-page report, citing her sources and explaining the linguistic trap. When Sungwoo Choi entered her office an hour later, he looked at her with the same cold, analytical appraisal she had seen in the restaurant. He noted that she had done in 7 hours what teams of lawyers couldn't achieve in a month. It wasn't a compliment, but a statement of fact. Her probationary period was over, and she was officially part of the organization. The staggering amount of money that flowed into Chloe's account following her success with the land grant was more than just numbers on a screen. It was a promise kept. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of the unknown lifted, replaced by the clinical, absolute security of Sungwoo Choi's backing. She moved her grandmother into a state-of-the-art private care facility, a place that felt more like a sanctuary than a hospital. It was a world of sun-drenched rooms, gentle nurses, and access to medical specialists whose fees had once seemed like impossible obstacles. As Chloe sat by her grandmother's bed, watching the steady, quiet rhythm of the machines that kept her heart beating, she finally felt a profound sense of peace. She had built a fortress of security around the only person who mattered to her, brick by linguistic brick. No longer did she have to calculate the cost of a single vial of medication against her university tuition or wonder if the next rent check would clear. Her transition into the organization's world of sterile boardrooms and high-stakes information architecture had provided her with a lethal set of tools, and she had used them to create a sanctuary. She was no longer just a girl with a good memory or a ghost in the hallowed halls of academia. She was a precision instrument whose value had been quantified and confirmed by one of the most powerful men in the city. In the quiet of the facility, Chloe believed she had won the war. She spent her afternoons reading stories of heroes to her grandmother, the same way the older woman had once read to her, feeling as though the dangerous world she now navigated was a small price to pay for this tranquility. But she had underestimated the venom of a woman scorned. While Chloe rested in her fortress, the wife she had humiliated at the restaurant was not disappearing. Stripped of her public standing and facing the cold reality of a looming divorce, the woman was festering in her own hatred, plotting a different kind of assault. Chloe believed the truth was her shield, but she was about to learn that the architecture of a lie could be just as devastating as the architecture of a contract. Chloe knew instantly who was responsible for the administrative siege on her life. The simultaneous assault on her academic standing and her grandmother's medical security had Hannah Min's vindictive signature written all over it. Daniel Park, acting on behalf of Sungwoo Choi, offered a swift, permanent solution to these administrative problems. He stood in the sterile light of the office, his tone suggesting that with one word from Chloe, the investigators and the false accusations would simply vanish into the shadows of the organization's influence. A part of Chloe, weary and frightened by the supervised visits and the frozen scholarship, was tempted to unleash that immense, shadowy power. But she refused. This was not Sungwoo's battle, it was hers. To use his methods would be a concession that she was no different from the predators she served. She would win this on her own terms, using the only weapons she truly trusted: information, logic, and the truth. Instead of muscle, Chloe requested access to the organization's digital archives on Hannah Min. She wanted the financial records, communication logs, and social calendars, a life documented in data. She wasn't looking for a single smoking gun. She was looking for the underlying architecture of a person's malice. For 3 days, she slept only in brief increments, her eyes glued to the flickering screens. She built a meticulous timeline of Mrs. Min's life, cross-referencing her social appearances with anonymous complaints filed against business rivals, disgruntled staff, and even former friends. A chilling pattern emerged. A caterer publicly shamed for a minor error was hit with a health violation the next day. A valet who scratched her car was arrested on a false tip a week later. It was a sociopathic tapestry of petty revenge orchestrated through private investigators and burner phones. Deep in the records of a disgraced investigator, Chloe finally found it, a single audio file, mislabeled and forgotten. It was a recording of a call, and though the voice was disguised, the calculation behind the lies about elder abuse was unmistakable. Chloe finally had her sword. Chloe knew instantly who was responsible for the administrative siege on her life. The simultaneous assault on her academic standing and her grandmother's medical security had Hannah Min's vindictive signature written all over it. Daniel Park, acting on behalf of Sungwoo Choi, offered a swift, permanent solution to these administrative problems. He stood in the sterile light of the office, his tone suggesting that with one word from Chloe, the investigators and the false accusations would simply vanish into the shadows of the organization's influence. A part of Chloe, weary and frightened by the supervised visits and the frozen scholarship, was tempted to unleash that immense, shadowy power. But she refused. This was not Sungwoo's battle, it was hers. To use his methods would be a concession that she was no different from the predators she served. She would win this on her own terms, using the only weapons she truly trusted: information, logic, and the truth. Instead of muscle, Chloe requested access to every digital file the organization had on Hannah Min. She wanted the financial records, communication logs, and social calendars, a life documented in data. She wasn't looking for a single smoking gun. She was looking for the underlying architecture of a person's malice. For 3 days, she slept only in brief increments, her eyes glued to the flickering screens. She built a meticulous timeline of Mrs. Min's life, cross-referencing her social appearances with anonymous complaints filed against business rivals, disgruntled staff, and even former friends. A chilling pattern emerged, clear and terrifying. A caterer publicly shamed for a minor error was hit with a health violation the next day. A valet who scratched her car was arrested on a false tip a week later. It was a sociopathic tapestry of petty revenge orchestrated through private investigators and burner phones. Deep in the phone records of a disgraced investigator, Chloe finally found it: a single audio file, mislabeled and forgotten. It was a recording of a call, and though the voice was disguised, the calculation behind the lies about elder abuse was unmistakable. Chloe finally had her sword. The silence in the vault was absolute as Chloe stared at the waveform on her screen, the visual representation of a person's undoing. For 3 days, she had lived on caffeine and the cold, driving need to protect her grandmother, deconstructing Hannah Min's life until it was nothing more than a series of data points and predictable patterns of malice. The mislabeled audio file she had pulled from the archives of a disgraced private investigator was the final, irreplaceable brick in the architecture of the truth. Chloe took a breath, her fingers hovering over the play button. The recording began with the sharp, artificial hiss of a burner phone, followed by a voice that was thin and distorted, yet undeniably Hannah's. It was a chillingly calculated performance, as the woman detailed a fabricated story of elder abuse at the care facility, her tone dripping with a false, trembling concern that made Chloe's skin crawl. There was no passion in the lie, only the cold, administrative efficiency of someone who viewed a human life as a tool for leverage. As the recording played, Chloe didn't feel the rush of triumph she had expected. Instead, she felt a profound, clinical clarity. This was the woman who had stood in a black satin dress and asked if she was illiterate, yet here she was, using the very language she claimed to master to weave a tapestry of sociopathic revenge. Chloe saw the entire structure now: the anonymous tips, the frozen scholarship, and the supervised visits were all part of a single, coordinated assault designed to reduce her to dust. She began the process of cross-referencing the audio metadata with cell tower data and Hannah's private communication logs. Every piece of evidence clicked into place with the satisfying snap of a lock. She had mapped the trajectory of the lie from its inception to the moment it had hit the university's financial aid office and adult protective services. It was an irrefutable monument to Hannah's cruelty, a linguistic forensic report that no lawyer or bureaucrat could ignore. Chloe leaned back in her chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her tired eyes. She had been tempted by Sungwoo Choi's offer of a swifter, more violent resolution, but as she looked at the irrefutable truth on her screen, she knew she had made the right choice. She wouldn't need his muscle. She had her own weapon now, a sword made of the very words Hannah had tried to use to destroy her. The final confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when. The final confrontation was not staged in an alleyway or a mahogany boardroom, but in a sterile university conference room. Chloe stood before the Academic Integrity Board, her posture a perfect, unmoving line of dignity that mirrored the night at the restaurant. To her surprise, Hannah Min was there, having manipulated her way into the hearing as a concerned citizen and witness to Chloe's supposedly unexplained wealth. She sat radiating smug righteousness, ready to watch the destruction of the girl she had dismissed as illiterate. When asked to respond to the allegations of fraud and neglect, Chloe did not address the grim-faced board members. Instead, she looked directly at Hannah. "You've built your life on the belief that you can control the story," Chloe began, her voice steady and clear. "That you can erase people with whispers and lies." She placed a sleek black audio player on the table. "But you can't erase a recording." The room fell into a vacuum of shock as Hannah's own voice, thin and distorted, filled the space. The recording detailed the calculated lies she had fed to the anonymous tip lines, her tones spitting out the very accusations that had frozen Chloe's life. Hannah's face went white, her triumphant mask crumbling into a pasty, slack-jawed horror. Chloe wasn't finished. She projected a timeline onto the wall, a digital architecture of malice that connected a dozen anonymous complaints, legal harassments, and payments to private investigators over 5 years back to a single source, Hannah Min. "This was never about my scholarship," Chloe said, her voice ringing with cold fury. "It was about you being humiliated in a restaurant. You couldn't stand that a waitress you dismissed as illiterate had more power in that moment than you did." The lead board member, a stern history professor, looked at Hannah with undisguised disgust. The hearing was dismissed immediately with an apology to Chloe and the offer of a full research fellowship to continue her graduate work. As Hannah collapsed in on herself, a hollowed-out shell, the final blow arrived quietly. Daniel Park stepped forward, placing a dossier in front of the university's legal counsel. This evidence, including the recording of her public malice, was being forwarded to the judge in the Min divorce case. It was a public action resulting in social disgrace. The 80% clause had been triggered. Chloe had won, not by stooping to her enemy's level, but by rising above it, armed with nothing but the truth. The war was over and the victory was hers alone.